Elon Musk sat in his office at Tesla's headquarters, a few miles from the Gigafactory, surrounded by pristine reports and figures detailing production schedules and the company's latest innovations. Despite the constant influx of emails and meetings, something gnawed at him. He knew Tesla's rapid expansion, its push for perfection, and its relentless pace. But he had never fully understood the weight of it all from the perspective of the workers who made it happen. One evening, while reviewing another quarterly report, a thought struck him. What's it really like down there? Musk had always prided himself on being a hands-on CEO, but there was one area he never fully explored: the factory floor. The everyday grind of assembling the machines, welding, bolting, and running back and forth on the production line. Was it as grueling as it seemed? How did the workers feel about the strict quotas? Was Tesla truly the company they believed in, or just another factory with a corporate mask? That night, Musk decided to do something about it. The next morning, disguised under a scruffy beard and wearing a standard-issue factory uniform, he made his way to Tesla's Gigafactory in Nevada. The guards didn't question him as he walked past security, a new recruit among thousands. He had carefully crafted a new identity for himself, Eli Moss, an entry-level worker from a different city who'd recently been hired. No one suspected that the man who just entered the production line was the billionaire genius behind it all. Musk took a deep breath as he entered the heart of the Gigafactory. The air was thick with the hum of machines and the rhythmic pounding of assembly lines. Men and women in coveralls worked tirelessly in a synchronized dance of labor, their faces weary but focused. Musk felt his heart rate spike. He was used to overseeing complex operations, but this was different. This was raw. His first task came quickly. He was assigned to a station where he would bolt battery modules onto the assembly line. Simple enough, or so it seemed. As he stepped up to the conveyor belt, he immediately noticed the pace. The line was moving faster than he'd anticipated, and there was no room for error. His supervisor, a tall man with a clipped tone, barked instructions at him. "Get those bolts tight, Moss. We're on a schedule. We don't have time for mistakes." Musk's hands fumbled with the tools, the unfamiliarity of the task causing his movements to slow. Sweat started to form at his brow. He couldn't keep up with the line speed. The sound of machines whirring and metal clanging grew deafening. The supervisor shot him a glare. "Come on! You're holding up the line." Musk's face flushed. He was used to solving complex problems, managing crises with ease. But here, he was struggling just to keep pace. He tightened the bolt incorrectly, and the supervisor was on him in an instant. "That's it. Fix it now, or I'll report you." The supervisor spat, his patience wearing thin. Musk nodded quickly, feeling the weight of failure closing in. As the hours dragged on, the reality of factory life hit him like a freight train. The labor was relentless. There were no breaks between the constant stream of tasks. The workers barely spoke to one another, their focus solely on the assembly line. Every minute, every second mattered. Any mistake could mean falling behind, and falling behind could mean losing your job. By the time the shift ended, Musk was exhausted. His hands ached from the constant movement, his back sore from bending over the line. He had barely spoken to anyone, just kept his head down and worked, too ashamed to show how much he was struggling. But something lingered as he left the factory floor. Despite the exhaustion, despite the frustration, there was a raw, unspoken bond between the workers that Musk couldn't ignore. They had each other's backs. It wasn't just about the work. It was about survival. They moved as one, cohesive, disciplined, and efficient, all united by the same relentless goal. As the days passed, Musk got to know a few of the workers during their breaks. He gravitated toward a group of veterans who had been at the factory for years. There was Tom, a middle-aged man with graying hair, and Jada, a woman in her 40s who worked on the assembly line alongside her younger colleagues. They spoke openly, unfiltered, about the conditions in the factory. "It's not easy, Eli," Tom said one afternoon as they huddled in the break room, drinking coffee. "The hours are long. The pay's not great, but it's a job. We do what we can to make it work." Jada nodded. "The company pushes us hard, but they don't listen when we raise concerns. Safety is a joke. They'd rather fix machines than fix the systems that actually matter." Musk listened carefully. This was the real story, the one no report would show. These were the voices of the workers who powered Tesla, but were rarely seen or heard. As they spoke, he found himself sympathizing more with them. He wasn't just a billionaire in disguise. He was a worker, struggling alongside them, feeling their frustrations. "Things have to change," Musk thought, though he said nothing. He spent the next few days quietly observing, taking mental notes of the inefficiencies, the broken machinery, and the lack of communication. There were clear gaps, things that, as CEO, he had never fully understood. One afternoon, a worker nearly lost a hand when a machine malfunctioned. The line came to a screeching halt as supervisors rushed to assess the damage. Musk's heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, he jumped forward, taking control of the situation. He knew exactly what to do, how to shut down the system, how to prevent further damage. The workers stared at him, surprised. "You're not a mechanic, are you?" Tom asked, his voice incredulous. Musk just shrugged, trying to mask the pride that surged inside him. "I've been around machines before. Just knew what to do." The incident rattled him. Seeing firsthand how safety procedures were being overlooked made him realize just how much needed to be fixed. But at that moment, he also knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. He had to make a decision. What next? Musk lay awake that night, the factory floor still fresh in his mind. He knew there was more to discover, but more than that, he now understood the workers' frustration. He had to push forward, no longer just as a man in disguise, but as the leader they needed. And soon, the world would find out just who Eli Moss really was. Musk had never expected the factory floor to be easy, but as he stood in front of his station the next morning, the weight of the job hit him harder than he anticipated. The assembly line was a constant stream of movement. Machines whirring, workers hustling, the repetitive sound of metal being welded and fastened. He was now a small cog in a massive, high-speed system. There was no room for hesitation, no room for error. His task for the day, bolt battery modules. Simple enough in theory. Take a bolt, twist it into place, move to the next. But as the belt moved faster and faster, Musk realized how quickly the job could overwhelm you. It wasn't just a physical strain. It was the mental toll of keeping up with the rhythm of the line. His hand shook slightly as he grabbed the first bolt. The supervisor, a gruff man named Burke, watched him like a hawk, his eyes narrow, lips set in a firm line. "Move quicker, Moss," Burke barked. "We've got quotas to hit. This line doesn't slow down for anyone." Musk gritted his teeth. He had designed rockets, created electric cars, managed groundbreaking projects. But here, on this assembly line, he was just another worker, struggling to keep pace. The belt sped up. Musk's heart pounded in his chest. His hands fumbled with the bolts, slipping a few times. "Focus, Eli," he told himself. But the pressure kept mounting. He could feel Burke's stare, feel the judgment in the air. Every mistake felt like a failure. Every second of lag threatened to throw the entire line off track. "Get it right, or you'll be out." Burke snapped as Musk made another mistake, struggling to screw in the bolt tightly enough. By the end of the day, Musk's fingers were sore, his mind foggy from the relentless pace. He stumbled out of the factory at shift's end, feeling the weight of the work in his muscles. He hadn't come close to meeting the speed and efficiency of the veteran workers, and his failure hung over him like a shadow. As he walked to his car, feeling defeated, he overheard two workers talking nearby. They were laughing, but there was a tiredness to their voices, an exhaustion that Musk now understood all too well. "You think they'll ever stop pushing us like this?" one of them asked. "I dunno, man," the other replied, "but we keep pushing. We gotta make it through another day." Musk's chest tightened. He hadn't just learned about the physical toll of factory work. He'd seen the mental exhaustion that came with it, the lack of appreciation, the constant strain to meet quotas, and the fear of being replaced if you didn't keep up. It hit him. This was a reality for every worker here, Star. That night, lying in his hotel room, Musk replayed the day in his head. He thought about the challenges of the job, the pressure, the constant grind. He understood now why workers seemed distant and weary. This wasn't just about assembly. It was about survival. And the system, designed to churn out products at lightning speed, left little room for human error. His curiosity had taken him this far, but now it was clear. If he was going to make a real change, he needed more than just understanding. He needed to fight for them. Fight for their dignity, their safety, their lives beyond the factory walls. The next day, He showed up early, more determined than ever. It wasn't about proving himself to anyone anymore. It was about what needed to change. And he was ready to face whatever came next. The second week on the factory floor was tougher. Musk had barely begun to acclimate to the pace when he realized the weight of the emotional toll it took. The unrelenting hours, the constant pressure, and the lack of a meaningful connection between workers made it clear that something was deeply missing from the culture. He felt like a small cog in a vast machine, one that demanded relentless efficiency without care for the human beings who powered it. It was during one of the breaks that Musk, still wearing his disguise, found the camaraderie he was searching for. As he sat on a metal bench in the break room, nursing a bottle of water, he overheard a conversation between a few veteran workers. Tom, Jada, and Carlos were leaning against the wall, their faces tired but at ease in each other's company. They spoke openly about the factory's flaws, something Musk hadn't yet dared to bring up himself. "Another quota hike today," Tom said, shaking his head. "How are we supposed to keep up? They keep pushing harder, but we're already at our limits." Jada grimaced. "They don't care, Tom. They just want numbers. Safety, efficiency, doesn't matter as long as they hit their target." Carlos, the youngest of the group, added with a resigned laugh, "You get used to it. It's just the way it is. Just another day of doing more with less." Musk leaned in, his voice quiet but sincere. "You all sound like you've been doing this for a long time." Tom looked over at him, his eyes sharp but not unfriendly. "Yeah, years. We've seen the changes, most of them not for the better." For the next few days, Musk spent more time with his small group, gradually earning their trust. They taught him the small tricks of the trade, how to navigate the unwritten rules, when to take breaks without getting caught, and how to hide your fatigue behind a mask of focus. They shared their stories, too, about families they barely saw, the wages that barely covered rent, and the safety issues that were constantly overlooked. Jada even confessed, "I've been here for 15 years, and I've never seen the company do anything to improve our conditions. It's like they forget we're people, not machines." Musk listened, taking in every word. It wasn't just about making cars. It was about making life better for the people who made them. The more he heard, the more determined he became to do something about it. He had already seen the cracks in the system, the pressure, the unspoken exhaustion, the lack of real communication. And he knew that if change was ever going to happen, it would have to start with the workers themselves. The factory floor felt like a pressure cooker, and Musk could sense the heat rising as the day wore on. The assembly line was moving faster than ever, the sound of machines melding into a constant roar. Musk was at his station, bolting in the battery modules, when the pace took a dangerous turn. It happened so suddenly that Musk didn't have time to react at first. One of the machines malfunctioned. A loud screeching noise split the air, followed by a sharp crack. A worker to his left, Jeremy, was caught in the mess. The heavy machinery jerked, the arm of the robotic welder swinging out of place, nearly clipping him. Musk's heart skipped a beat as he watched Jeremy stumble back, his hands reaching out instinctively to avoid the wreckage. Without thinking, Musk sprang into action. He was across the floor in seconds, reaching the machine's control panel and yanking the emergency stop lever just as the malfunctioning arm swung dangerously close. The line came to a halt in an instant. Musk turned to see Jeremy gasping, his face pale but unharmed. The room was silent for a heartbeat. Then chaos erupted as supervisors and safety personnel rushed over. "Is he okay?" Musk asked, his voice surprisingly steady. Jeremy nodded weakly, still shaken. "Yeah, just a close call." The scene seemed to freeze around them. The other workers on the floor were staring, some in shock, some with wide eyes. Musk had just saved someone's life, and they knew it. A supervisor hurried over, his face a mixture of irritation and concern. "What are you doing, Moss?" he barked, the usual authoritarian edge in his voice. "You're not trained for this kind of thing." Musk stood tall, his pulse still racing. The machine wasn't working properly. Someone could have gotten hurt. It had to stop. For a moment, the supervisor said nothing. Then he muttered, "Just get back to work." But the workers had seen something different. The tension on the floor seemed to loosen just a fraction. Musk had done something that no one expected from the higher-ups. He'd stepped in, not just as a bystander, but as someone who truly cared. The moment was subtle, but to the workers around him, it was everything. Jeremy, still shaken, clapped Musk on the back as he returned to his station. "You know your stuff, Moss. Appreciate it." Musk smiled faintly. "No problem. Just trying to keep everyone safe." As the day dragged on, Musk felt the weight of the accident settle in his chest. The factory floor wasn't just about speed and efficiency. It was about life and death, too. The lack of proper safety checks had nearly cost him everything. Musk couldn't ignore it anymore. This moment, more than any other, crystallized his resolve. It wasn't just about fixing quotas or boosting profits. It was about fixing the system that allowed workers to be put at risk for the sake of speed. He needed to do more than listen. He needed to act. After the accident, Musk couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something had to change. It wasn't just about one malfunctioning machine. It was the entire system, the pressure, the inefficiencies, and the lack of consideration for the workers who were expected to push through it all. The next few days passed in a blur of frustration. Musk kept his head down, following the line's pace, but it became harder to ignore the cracks in the system. He had now worked alongside these people long enough to understand the nuances of their struggles. It wasn't just about the grueling pace. It was about the lack of communication, the confusion around safety, the constant pressure to meet impossible quotas. He spent every break talking to the workers, Tom, Jada, Carlos, and others. They continued to open up about their experiences, and the more Musk listened, the more he realized just how much had been overlooked. Their concerns were simple but critical. Better safety protocols, clearer expectations, more reasonable targets. They didn't want miracles, just a recognition that they were human beings, not cogs in a machine. Musk found himself growing frustrated. How had this slipped through the cracks? How had he, as the CEO, allowed his own company to become a place where workers were treated as expendable? He had always prided himself on innovation, on pushing boundaries, on being hands-on. But now, he saw that his focus on the big picture, on innovation and technology, had blinded him to the reality of the people actually making it all happen. He began to notice inefficiencies that no one seemed to address. The breakdown of communication between departments, the lack of preventive maintenance on machines, and the slow-moving bottlenecks that made the entire process more stressful than it needed to be. But it wasn't just the systems that frustrated him. It was the people who were supposed to be in charge of fixing them. Musk realized that management was as much a part of the problem as the workers. They were distant, out of touch with the reality on the floor, relying on outdated metrics that didn't account for the human element. By the end of the week, Musk was no longer just an observer. He was angry at the system, angry at himself for not noticing sooner, and most of all, angry at the lack of change. He had seen enough, and now he was ready to do something about it. The week had been grueling. Musk felt his disguise begin to wear thin as the factory's pace, its inefficiencies, and the lack of basic respect for the workers weighed on him. His resolve had only hardened. He couldn't let this continue. The accident, the broken communication, the constant pressure, these were things that could be fixed with a little attention, a little care. But it wasn't just the workers who needed to change. The entire system, top to bottom, was flawed. On the final day of his week-long experiment, Musk knew it was time to act. He couldn't stay in the shadows any longer. He had learned enough, seen enough, to make a difference. But there was one thing left to do, something that would make all of it real, something that would force the system to take notice. The factory had called a meeting with all the workers, and Musk knew this was a moment. He had to break his cover and reveal his identity. As the workers gathered in the small conference room, murmurs filled the air. Musk stood in the back, among the other factory employees, his heart racing. He had never been nervous like this before. This wasn't about innovation or big ideas. This was about facing the people he had been working beside all week. The manager, Burke, stood at the front, talking about new goals for the next quarter, increasing production targets, and the usual empty promises of safety improvements. Musk felt a deep, almost painful disconnect as he listened to Burke drone on. He had seen the safety failures firsthand, heard the workers' concerns, and now the manager was oblivious to all of it. The tension in the room was palpable. The workers, exhausted and drained, were already bracing for another cycle of the same old speech. Musk's hand went to the collar of his factory uniform, his fingers grazing the edge of his fake identity. Without warning, he stepped forward, pushing past a few surprised workers. All eyes turned to him, and for a brief moment, there was complete silence. Musk removed his cap, then pulled off the scruffy beard he had been wearing for days. The gasps that followed were immediate, rippling through the room. The workers' jaws dropped, their eyes widening in disbelief as they realized who they were looking at. "I'm not Eli Moss," Musk said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that commanded attention. "I'm Elon Musk." A stunned silence followed. No one knew how to react. Burke's face twisted in confusion, but Musk didn't let the moment linger. He continued, his voice steady, yet filled with conviction. "I've been here for a week. I've worked alongside you. I've seen what you deal with every day, the long hours, the unsafe machines, the impossible quotas. I've seen it all, and I'm here to tell you, things need to change." The workers were still in shock, trying to process what had just happened. But Musk wasn't done. "I know this is hard to believe, but I've seen enough to know that Tesla isn't perfect. I've failed you by not paying attention, and I won't let that continue." The room was thick with a mix of disbelief and a rising hope. Musk had no idea how they would react, but he was ready for whatever came next. He had broken his cover, and now the real work could begin. The room was still silent after Musk's reveal, the shock hanging in the air like a thick fog. Workers exchanged confused glances, unsure of how to process the man who had been beside them, working shoulder to shoulder for the past week, now standing in front of them as their CEO. Burke, the manager, looked as though he'd been hit by a freight train, his mouth opening and closing without words. Musk let the silence stretch on for a few moments, letting the gravity of his words settle in. Then he stepped forward, his voice steady but unwavering. "I've seen firsthand how hard you work. I've seen the broken systems, the lack of support, the dangerous conditions. And it ends today." The workers, still processing the surprise, began to stir. Whispers ran to the crowd, followed by the shifting of feet and hands. Musk continued, each word like a hammer striking the anvil of change. "We're going to fix this," he said, locking eyes with several of the workers. "This isn't just about production quotas or numbers on a report. This is about you, your safety, your well-being, your dignity. And I will make sure that the conditions here are what they should have been all along." A murmur of disbelief and cautious optimism rippled through the group. Musk paused, letting the words sink in before he continued. "We're implementing immediate changes. First, safety will be our top priority. We will audit every machine, fix every hazard, and train every worker on proper safety protocols. Second, we'll look at the production quotas. No one should be expected to work at the pace of machines. We're human beings, not robots. And third, wages. We're going to make sure you're paid fairly for the work you do." The workers, who had been skeptical at first, now began to listen intently. Some even nodded in agreement, a spark of hope igniting in their eyes. Burke stepped forward, still recovering from the shock. "You can't just change everything overnight. There are processes in place." Musk cut him off, his voice firm but not unkind. "I'm not here to talk about processes, Burke. I'm here to talk about people. The people who build our cars, who make this company what it is. And if that means tearing down some of the outdated systems, then so be it." The tension in the room slowly began to dissipate. The workers, Many of whom had never imagined someone like Musk would take an interest in their plight, now felt the weight of his words. Musk looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the tired faces in front of him. This is just the beginning, but it's a beginning I want to take together with you all. We'll rebuild the trust that's been lost. We'll rebuild Tesla. Asterisk all of us star dot. For the first time all week, a genuine sense of hope spread through the factory. The workers didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but they now knew they had a CEO who saw them, not just as workers, but as people, and that made all the difference. As the meeting came to an end, Musk made his way to the door, surrounded by a mix of cautious optimism and whispered excitement. But he knew this was only the first step. The real work was just beginning. Weeks passed, and the factory began to transform in ways Musk hadn't anticipated. The changes weren't instant, but they were visible, small at first, then growing as the weeks went on. The safety audits were completed, with each machine checked and recalibrated. The factory floor, once a place where workers dodged faulty equipment and barely survived the chaotic pace, was now a safer environment. Workers, once fearful of accidents, began to take a collective sigh of relief as new protocols were put in place. More regular breaks were scheduled. The pace of the line slowed slightly, making it more manageable without sacrificing quality. Wages were adjusted, a small but powerful sign that Musk meant what he said about valuing the workers. The announcement wasn't met with fanfare, but with grateful nods and quiet appreciation. It wasn't about big gestures. It was about the consistency of change that spoke louder than any proclamation. But the most notable transformation wasn't in the tools or the paychecks. It was in the culture of the factory itself. Musk, who had once been a distant figure overseeing his empire from afar, was now a regular presence on the floor. He no longer walked in wearing a disguise, but his visits were still filled with genuine interest. He spent time with the workers, engaging with them, not just as their CEO, but as someone who truly understood their struggles. He learned their names, asked about their families, and showed up to their meetings to discuss solutions, not problems. The workers, who had once felt like they were cogs in a machine, now felt heard. They had a voice, and Musk was listening. The constant tension that had once permeated the factory floor started to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of pride and purpose. They were no longer just meeting quotas. They were part of something larger, a movement that sought to reshape not only Tesla but the way business treated its employees. One afternoon, as Musk walked the factory floor, he noticed Tom, Jada, and Carlos leaning against the wall during their break. Their smiles were wide, and they waved at him as he approached. "Hey, Eli!" Tom called out with a grin, using the nickname they'd given him during his Undercover days. Musk smiled back, shaking his head. "I guess I'm stuck with that now, huh?" Jada laughed. "You earned it, man. You stuck with us, and you listened. That's more than most bosses would do." The workers around them nodded in agreement. There was a sense of camaraderie now, a quiet but powerful acknowledgement that things had changed. And it wasn't just the machines or the quotas that had shifted. Musk walked away from the group, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. This was the moment he had hoped for. The factory wasn't just more efficient now. It was a community bound by trust, respect, and shared goals. And for the first time in his career, Musk felt like he was leading something truly transformative. He wasn't just running a company. He was shaping a culture. And this time, it was built from the ground up.